What is China's 100-year plan to rule the world? Occupying Till He Comes at Southwest Prophecy Ministries. Well, welcome, friends. This is David Schnitker, your host for today's program. Thank you for joining us. Just a reminder that it is your support, both in gifts and prayers, that keep this ministry coming your way. If you would like to contribute to this ongoing faith ministry, which deals with Bible prophecy and current events, simply go to our website to contribute. Our website address is www.swpm.us. You will find a donate link on the web homepage. The website address again, www.swpm.us. We thank you for your prayers for this faith ministry as we move into our 7th year. We appreciate each and every one of you. Well, it is a great privilege today to have Carol Rushton on the program to discuss her September 2021 Last Days Beacon article entitled "The Next Global Superpower: How China's Leaders Have Duped the U.S. and Plan to Rule the World." Very important subject. And Carol has done a tremendous job giving us a history and background of the Chinese strategy to dominate America. We will tell you at the end of the program how you can order extra copies of this article. Well, I've had the joy and privilege of knowing Carol for many years at a previous ministry and for over 6 years at Southwest Prophecy Ministries. Carol is an accomplished author and broadcaster and had the privilege of living in Jerusalem for 8 years while working at the Jerusalem Post. She recently authored a book for our ministry, and it is entitled "Understanding Israel and the Middle East: Myths, Misconceptions, and the Truth About Israel and Her Neighbors." And we have copies of this available in our bookstore. Again, go to our website, go to the bookstore, and order "Understanding Israel and the Middle East," and we may even get you an autographed copy. So we'd love to have you. This is a great book, and we've distributed many copies of this. It's extremely relevant, particularly as we head into a new period of turmoil in the Middle East thanks to the Biden regime. Well, Carol, not only being an expert on the Middle East, she is also a courageous, patriotic American who is not afraid to tell the truth about the Communist Chinese Party threat facing America today. So in the article that we're going to be discussing, Carol deals with the Communist Chinese Party 100-year plan to supplant America as the next global superpower. Well, Carol, thank you for joining us today.
Well, thank you so much for having me.
Well, it's great that you did the research on this, and we want to cover some of the main items that you deal with in the article and encourage, of course, each of our listeners who are not on the mailing list to order extra copies, and I'll tell you how to get to do that at the end of today's program. Well, one of the things you deal with, Carol, in your article is what's known as the Warring States period in Chinese history. Of course, China's history is quite long compared to the United States. We're kind of a teenager on the world scene, but China has about a 5,000-year history. And there was a period in China's history known as the Warring States period, which was between 475 BC to 221 BC. And out of that, they developed certain strategies. So we'd like to begin by talking about the Warring States period and why it's important in understanding China's global strategy.
Mm-hmm. Okay, well, the Warring States period that China talks about, and they talk about this very extensively, and they reference it very extensively. It was between approximately 475 BC and 221 BC. Again, you're talking about when you think about that period of time, and you think about history in the Middle East, you talk about European history, you're starting to, by about 221, you're starting to think about Roman history, and so this is kind of the context that this is in. And the reason why the Warring States period is so important to China is because they developed certain strategies during that period. And they reference it a lot. Even Mao Zedong was a great student of the Warring States period, and he referenced that a lot. He used the Warring States period a lot when he was in power in China. So the Warring States period is referenced many times in their textbooks. It's a part of Chinese history. It's part of Chinese folklore. The Art of War by Sun Tzu. That's a book that came out of that period. So a lot of the strategies that Sun Tzu talks about in his book come from that particular period of history. And so this is something that Chinese have in their culture, their society. And it drives a lot of what they do, and drives a lot of their relationships now with other countries, in particular the United States of America. So this is why this is very important.
Well, let's talk more about those strategies. What are some of the strategies from the Warring States period that may be being employed against the United States?
Okay. Well, one of them, I'll just reference about 3 of them right now. They have exactly, I think, 36 stratagems that they talk about. 3 of the most important ones. The first one is she. And it's S-H-I. That's how we would write it and pronounce it in English. And she is a concept that may be difficult to actually define, and this is according to Pillsbury. A lot of what the information that I have in this article I got from Michael Pillsbury in his book, The 100-Year Marathon. And Michael Pillsbury says that it's sort of like a country or person starting to arrange things and so that they come out on top, that things go their way, but they have to. But you do it in a very subtle way, and not it's not obvious, but it just seems that things work out your way. And I think something an English equivalent, as close as we could come, would be nudge. You know, you're nudging somebody in the direction you want them to go, and the result that you get is the result that you want, not that your opponent wants or not that your enemy wants, but something that you want. So that's sort of that particular concept, as close as we can get to. There's another concept that's called Wu Wei, and that's getting your enemy or your opponent to do your work for getting them to do what you want them to do, that gives you an advantage. And one of the examples that Pillsbury gives in his book is Tom Sawyer. Tom Sawyer, in his book, he was assigned to paint a fence. Well, when his friends came along, he really didn't want to paint this fence. It was a chore to him. But he presented it to his friends as, he was doing something that was a real work of art. He was really, like he was being an actual painter, a masterpiece. So he got, as each friend came along, he would present this, he's doing this great work of art. And at the end, he got all of his friends to paint the fence for him, and he was just sitting there doing nothing. So it's getting... And
these friends thought they were being given a privilege.
Yes,
that Tom was doing them a favor.
Tom was doing them a favor. So this is kind of that particular...
That's woo-wee.
Yeah, that's a wu-wei.
Wu-wei.
Wu-wei. I think that's how you pronounce it. And it's getting others to do your work for them. So you're not expending your energy, your time, your talents, your money, your investments. You're getting your opponent to do that for you so that you can have an advantage over them. The last one we're going to talk about today is, and I hope I pronounced this correctly, Tao Guan Yang Hai. And I hope that's pronounced correctly. That is concealing what you're trying to do from your enemy or your opponent. You're working a strategy but you're presenting it to your opponent as, oh, well, we're not really doing this. We're really not doing this. You really want to look over here.
It's a strategy of concealment.
It's a strategy
as to your true ambitions.
As to your true ambitions, what you want to do, and the Chinese have been masters of doing all of this for decades, as we're going to find out.
Mm-hmm. Well, then, having exposed at least 3 of these strategies from the the Warring States period, how has China used some of these strategies over the years with the United States?
Well, Mao was a great master of this, and we'll go back to a little bit to the Great Famine. Mm-hmm. Which was Mao instituted the Great Leap Forward because he was going to surpass the British Empire in steel production at that time. And we're talking about late 50s, 1950s, early 1960s. Mm-hmm. And that was his goal. And he got the Chinese to melt down everyday silverware, everyday products and pots and pans, and get them to do little smelt things in their backyard to melt all this down. Well, that didn't do anything. You can't use that mm-hmm. for steel production. Mm-hmm. Yet he got many Chinese to do that. He drew people away from their farms and put them on collectives, and they would have to work on these collective farms. They were poorly fed, and they were abused and tortured and beaten if they didn't produce their quota. Every day he had lots of public works projects that really, failed. And as a consequence, I think some scholars put it that through the Great Leap Forward, at least 20 million Chinese died. Because they were reduced to eating the bark from trees. They were reduced to eating mud, and it was just horrific. And Mao took no responsibility for this whatsoever. And he got a lot of criticism within the communist Chinese leadership. And so he decided that this involved, he then did the Cultural Revolution, which pitted, there was kind of like a civil war between them. And then you go into Mao's relationship with the Soviet Union and with the U.S. Now, the Soviet Union, of course, had a communist leadership for some decades before Mao came along. Mm-hmm. So I think the Soviet leadership felt like they were the top dog as far as the communist world. And Mao didn't really like that. He wanted to be the top dog in the communist world. And so his relationship with Soviet leaders kind of varied from, sometimes it was okay, sometimes it was good, sometimes it was not. So he finally, I think he engineered a lot of this. I don't know that it was really true, but he engineered this concept, this image to the United States when Nixon became president, that he and the Soviet Union were at odds together, opposed to each other. They were not, they had stopped their alliance, they had broken off their alliance, and that China was in grave danger of the Soviet Union attacking them. I honestly don't think the Soviet Union had any designs to attack communist China at all. I mean, I think the whole thing sounds very ludicrous. But that is how Mao wanted to present China to the United States government. And they unfortunately convinced people like Henry Kissinger and, of course, the President Richard Nixon that China was in grave danger from being attacked by the Soviet Union. So this was one of the impetuses that convinced Nixon to go to China and have the meeting with Mao. And Nixon and Kissinger promised China to give them some intel on the Soviet Union, to set up different cooperations, military cooperation with the United States in case of a Soviet attack. Just things that are, to be honest, really are shocking. Because if these things had been known to the American public, I think at that time would have been up in arms. They would never have agreed to something like this.
So are you saying, in short, Carol, that Mao duped the United States leadership into helping them against an imaginary threat?
I think so. I honestly do. And this continued, unfortunately, through the Ford administration and the Carter administration, Jimmy Carter, and during the Nixon, Ford, and Carter administrations. These administrations allowed China to send foreign students to the United States, to our universities, to get degrees and knowledge in things like science, engineering, aerospace technology, biotechnology, medical science. And both Mao and Deng Xiaoping presented, after Mao died and Deng Xiaoping eventually took over as leadership of Communist China, they presented this image of China, that China is a very backward country. And to be honest with you, it was in a lot of ways, simply because my dad took many trips over to China, and the pictures he would bring back were just stunning, really devastated landscapes, no modern buildings. Most of the people either got around on foot or by train or by bicycle. If you saw a truck or a vehicle on the road, it was most likely something from the government.
So it was still a backward third world country.
In lots of ways it was. But this is how they got the United States to give them investments. And it wasn't just students coming over. They actually gave them military and technological and IT know-how, computers, things that China claimed that they didn't have access to, and they just wanted to modernize their country. They didn't have any designs as far as being a global superpower or trying to overtake the United States.
Or at least not that was revealed.
No.
It was concealed.
It was very concealed. And both Mao and Deng Xiaoping, well, you know, that China would ever threaten the United States as far as being a military or economic power is just the most ludicrous thing. And of course, China had no designs on doing that at all. And this even continued through the Reagan administration. And we gave them just a great amount of military technological know-how that is stunning.
Now, of course, all that stopped during the Clinton administration, didn't it?
I don't think so.
Didn't Bill Clinton put an end to all that?
I don't think so.
I'm just kidding.
And this has been going on for decades. And I think that if the American public had known any of the technology that we willingly gave them, the military technology, IT technology, science, computers, aerospace, engineering, I think that the American public would have just been up in arms and demanded that whoever was president at that time either be impeached or would demand their resignation.
So in effect, looking back, we basically provided the technology and the education needed for what is now our greatest enemy.
Yes.
That has ambitions to basically turn America into a farm.
Yes.
Colonize America.
Right. And so when on this kind of the Chinese efforts, communist leaders' Chinese efforts to get all this medical, technological, aerospace, engineering, science, all of these things that they so desperately needed. You can see that, Wu Wei, you're getting your opponent to do your work for them, and Tao Guang, Yang Hai, you're concealing your actual intentions from your opponent or your enemy, and you're kind of nudging them along in the direction that you want them to go without them realizing
even knowing it.
Yeah.
Now, you touched earlier, Carol, on the Cultural Revolution that Mao Zedong undertook after his Great Leap Forward, and what strategies do you see that American Marxists are using in the U.S. that China used during the Cultural Revolution?
Well, after the Great Leap Forward, Mao and all the criticism that he got from a lot of the Chinese leaders, that he was just stunned that he would be criticized at all. So he felt very threatened. He felt threatened that people that were close to him would have him removed, and he would lose his position. And of course, when you're talking about communists, if you're removed from your position, it doesn't end well for you.
It's true. It's only one way out.
Yes, and so he, in order to keep his opponents off balance, and he plunged the country into a great amount of turmoil. And so, without his closest, even those in his inner circle being really aware of it, he proclaimed that we just needed to get rid of the old ideas and the old ways of doing things, our traditions, our culture, our history. We need to get rid of all those things, and we need to be really strong communist revolutionaries. And we have traitors in our country who are following the capitalist road, and they're capitalist roaders. We need to get rid of them, and we need to return to communism and socialism. And Lin Bao, who was one of his closest comrades, who actually fought with him against Chiang Kai-shek in the civil war that Mao and the communists had against Chiang Kai-shek when they ousted him, he actually gave a speech about all of this. And they would people in his inner circle and people who were privy to all this information, they would go around giving speeches. And it caused a great deal of, it was almost like a civil war within communist China, because it pitted they gave a lot of these speeches to students, which encouraged students to rise up in violence against their fellow Chinese citizens. You had attacks on people just walking down the street if they were wearing Western clothes, if they were wearing a Western style hat, if they were had a kind of a Western style hairdo, or they wore makeup, or beautiful clothes, or high heels. People come up and rip their clothes to shred and beat them up, and just walking down the sidewalk.
All with the approval of the government.
All with the approval of the government, and this led to students rising up against their teachers, accusing them of being capitalist. This caused students to beat their teachers, torture their teachers. Sometimes the students murdered their teachers. And this was all within the...
Were young people sometimes turned against their own parents and grandparents?
Yes. Yes, I mean, because you can't trust the older generation, because they haven't been indoctrinated into communism like the youth, supposedly. And even if you were a loyal communist, you could be accused of anything without foundation, and you had to go to struggle sessions where you had to write out and confess your sins and how you had violated the communist socialist agenda and the communist social government, and how you had been a traitor. And so you would have to write out and confess your sins, and you had to confess these in public and get up and before people.
But that would never happen in America. Would it?
Well, what we have seen about, but nonetheless, 10, 15 years, you've had academics now and other people in socialist, Democrat Party circles saying that you're a racist, you're a white supremacist, your white rage is. Joint Chiefs of Staff Samili has said he's concerned about white rage. And you have to get up and you have to confess your sins of being a white supremacist or a racist and being privileged just because you're Caucasian. You're automatically racist simply because of your skin color. It doesn't matter who you are as a person. And so you're condemned simply because you're oppressing people of different skin colors simply because of your skin color, not because of the person you are. They've taken, Dr. Martin Luther King says, that we should be judged not by the color of our skin, but by the content of our character. They have abandoned Dr. Martin Luther King's Jr.'s vision for the United States of America. And so they've actually now, in corporations across the United States, in the military, in different companies, in different social circles, you now have to confess your sins as being, if you're a Caucasian, you have to confess your sins as a white supremacist within your, and write out confessions. And this is insane. I mean, we saw this in the election in California. Larry Elder, who is black, was called a white supremacist.
Yes, he is a white supremacist.
He said, we called him a white supremacist. So this is now, they have used the communist tactics to try to pit American against American and to get us to hate each other. And
I remember during the race riots of 2020 in the lead up to the national stolen election, there were actual BLM protesters facing down white policemen and police chiefs. And I remember seeing a video of a white police chief laying flat on his belly, kissing the feet of the BLM rioters and confessing his white privilege. It was ridiculous.
Yes, you had to confess your white privilege. You're automatically privileged. For instance, I, Carol Rushton, who am Caucasian, who don't make very much money at all, and I'm oppressing LeBron James, who makes $100 million a year. So I'm automatically guilty of
and
oppressing.
LeBron James is deathly afraid of you. He says he's afraid to go outside because he's black, and he's afraid of what white people will do to him. I guess that's on the days when his security guards are off duty. I guess that's
and I'm sure he lives in a gated community in a wonderful mansion and has bodyguards
private security.
And private security, and he's probably driven around in a limousine with a driver. So a lot of this is it's ludicrous, but this is now what is happening in our country. And you see the rioters, Black Lives Matter and Antifa, attacking Americans. I've seen footage of white Black Lives Matter protesters going up to black policemen and telling them that they're racist. It's just the amount of insanity now that is going on in the country is just amazing. But they're getting this from communist China. And you can tell when Lin Biao gave up and gave a speech that the youth of China had to abandon and get rid of their old traditions, their old culture, all the things that they had grown up with. Michelle Obama basically said the same thing in 2008 when her husband was running for the president. In the presidential campaign, he says, Barack knows that we have to we have to get to a new place. We have to get rid of our history. We have to change our history. We have to change our culture. We have to move into a new place. So she basically echoed what Lin Biao had said decades earlier.
So this is a Maoist strategy.
Yes.
In America, an American cultural revolution.
It is.
Do you think that the tearing down of American statues of American heroes is going all the way back to George Washington and Christopher Columbus? The statues are being torn down.
Yes, well, you have to change the history of a country if you're going to destroy it. And this is something that the communist Chinese have done. They have changed the history in their worldview, in their textbooks to Chinese students and academics in regular school, colleges, universities in China, to portray that for about almost 200 years, the United States has had it out for China. And even going back to the presidents of John Tyler and Abraham Lincoln, accusing them of being anti-China, and they were trying to oppress the Chinese in some of their decisions. With all due respect, I think Abraham Lincoln had a lot more important things on his plate than communist China.
I think so. And Yeah, I think that we are undergoing a cultural revolution. I think of the 1619 Project.
Yes.
That a pseudo-historian is trying to foist on American public schools. That basically says our whole history is racism and slavery. That really, from the time that Americans landed on Plymouth Rock, 1619, it was all about slavery and oppression.
Right.
And so this is a form of Maoist cultural revolution and a revisionist history, which basically says that the whole driving force behind America's, certainly white settlers, was slavery, enslavement.
Yes, and of course they ignore Thomas Jefferson's. I mean, he didn't make it into the Declaration of Independence, but he actually had at the end he had something in there that accused the British King George, of instituting slavery in our country, and that we did not want slavery. We wanted men to be free, and slavery was horrible. It was an abomination. Actually, Thomas Jefferson, when he was elected to the House of Burgesses in Virginia in 1769, his first official act was to introduce a bill allowing slave owners to free their slaves in Virginia. Now, it didn't pass, but that was his first official act. Thomas Jefferson was in no way a racist. He most of the slaves that he owned, that he got inherited from his father who died and from his marriage, to his wife and his wife's family. That's where most of his slaves came from. And and George Washington freed his slaves upon his
death. And that's why his estate fell into ruin, because he freed all of his slaves.
He freed all of his slaves.
Yes.
And Thomas Jefferson, he gets a lot of criticism for not freeing his slaves, but Thomas Jefferson, and we can maybe criticize this now, but Thomas Jefferson loved his books. He loved his wine, and he was what we would call now a land-rich, cash poor. So he just didn't have the money to free his slaves upon his death.
In fact, when he died, he was $150,000 in debt.
Yes.
Which at that time was a considerable amount of money.
Yes. Well, it still is.
Yes, it is.
If you don't have it.
If you don't have it, it still is. Yes, he was certainly conflicted about slavery and was not an advocate of slavery.
Not at all. He really opposed slavery, and I think the reason why they could, one of the reasons they couldn't get rid of slavery at that time was that, number one, they didn't really know how. Had to be able to get the slaves educated so they could go on their own, and because they weren't allowed in many states to learn how to read or write. And number two, they wanted to keep the Union intact. They wanted to keep the 13 colonies intact, and and the only way they could keep the 13 colonies intact to fight the British was to not deal with slavery at that time. In fact, Thomas Jefferson said, "I tremble for my country when I think of God being a just God, because He's going to remember basically what he was saying was he's going to remember what we did and did not do about slavery, and he's going to bring judgment upon our country." I mean, the United States of America is the only nation or country in the history of the world that fought a war to get rid of slavery.
Right, absolutely. Yeah.
So
and Lincoln, the great emancipator, in some of his speeches said that we are going through the Civil War because of God's judgment.
Yes, God's judgment, and he
on slavery.
Yes, and there were two. It was a two-pronged reason why Abraham Lincoln, we had the Civil War. He wanted to keep the Union intact, but he also wanted to free slavery. So he had kind of a two-pronged goal there. And you can level many criticisms about Abraham Lincoln, but I think we need to take the context as a whole, because he wanted to keep the Union intact, which he did, and he wanted to free the slaves, which he did. So, I mean... And
it's interesting, these cultural Marxists even want to tear down statues of Abraham Lincoln. It's absolute craziness.
Yes. So they want to destroy our history.
Right.
And
the good and the bad, all of it.
All of it. And, Dr. Martin Luther King's niece, Dr. Alveda King, said, instead of tearing down these statues of Robert E. Lee and all these Confederates, why don't you put a plaque up there explaining the context and why the statue is there and teaching people history, not just tearing down statues willy-nilly. It's really insane.
The communists want to destroy history so they can revise it and rewrite it.
Just like the communist Chinese are doing in their country.
Yeah. Last question. What does China really think about the United States?
Well, the communist Chinese view everything through the communist Chinese lens and the Warring States period lens as well. And so they feel that the United States of America doesn't have good intentions where China is concerned. They think that we're trying to take over the world and we're going to attack China. We're going to try to subject them and subdue them, which is just absolutely ludicrous. It's just insane.
It sounds like a projection to me.
Yes, and so they want to get rid of or subdue us before we subdue them, and so they think they think we're tyrants.
It's crazy.
It is.
Yeah.
But those are some of the.
You'd think they would be very appreciative of all that we have done for them over the years, and that really we've done everything that would be consistent with friendship as opposed to animosity.
Yes, there are a lot of companies that operate in China.
Yes.
There are a lot of companies that have made great investments in China. So it's hard. It's difficult to explain, but they see everybody as it's we against the world, basically. That's to put it in a nutshell.
Well, we're out of time for today.
Okay.
It's been a great introduction to your article, and I appreciate you joining us for today's discussion.
Well, thank you so much for having me. I think this is really an important, very, very important topic because China is our number one enemy, and you can tell, now that we've pulled out of Afghanistan, who rushed in to fill the void? Communist China.
And that's what they do.
So.
Absolutely. Well, Carol will be doing further broadcasts with us and further articles on China because China is our number one strategic enemy as a country. And we dare not take our eyes off of them. And the greater understanding that we can have of communist China, the greater the possibility that we might be able to resist them.
Yes.
And we as Christians are called to resist evil until the Lord takes us home. Well, friends, today we are offering an excellent article, the one we've been discussing, and that is our September Last Days Beacon article on the next global superpower. And so, if you are not on our mailing list, we would love to put extra copies of this in your hands. And so you may order 5 copies for a donation of $5 or 25 copies for a $15 contribution. And I'll even go to say if you would like to just order a free copy, feel free to write to us. You have our P.O. Box number and request a free copy of our article. We'd love to put it in your hands. So friends, thank you for joining us for today's podcast. I look forward to seeing you next time. Until then, this is your host, David Schnitker. Thanks for listening.